Hey, 42 here. Don't wear a mask. Wear a mask. Don't wear a mask. No, wait. Do wear one at all times. Except here, and maybe there. The advice around wearing face masks to reduce the spread of COVID-19, coming from some governments, large NGOs and IGOs, has been, at best, confusing, and at worst, outright contradictory. That's why I want to dive deep into the science behind wearing masks, to bust some common myths and answer two simple questions. Does wearing a face mask reduce the spread of COVID-19? And is it something we should all be doing right now? Well, to sort of answer the second question, I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should wear a mask. It isn't my place to do so. You are, hopefully, a responsible person, and I'm sure you'll assess the science, weigh up all the advice from various sources, and come to your own conclusion based on your unique circumstances. But how can you even begin to make that call without clear, science-backed information? Instructing the general population to wear a face mask has never been a popular decision, even when it is ostensibly for the greater good. In 1918, towards the end of World War I, the Spanish flu, now known to have been the H1N1 influenza virus, swept across the world, infecting 1/3 of the global population and killing up to an estimated 50 million people. During the height of the pandemic, governments around the globe introduced restrictive measures to curb the spread of the killer virus, especially to protect frontline troops from falling ill. All the way from no spitting rules and closing schools to, yes, you guessed it, mandating the wearing of face masks. Most people, an estimated 80%, complied with the mask-wearing mandate, but there were rebellious splinter groups such as the imaginatively named Anti-Mask League that formed in San Francisco, who outright refused to don one, citing their discomfort and restriction on breathing. Some people also felt that masks made day-to-day business awkward and unprofessional. But how did this mask-wearing experiment play out? Did it have any effect on quelling the Spanish flu's virulence or slowing its spread? Not really. This graph shows the results of a study published in 1919 by the California State Department of Health, comparing weekly death rates per 100,000 people in Stockton, where the wearing of masks was made compulsory, and Boston, where it wasn't. As you can see, there's little to no difference between the curves. However, there's more to this data than meets the eye. And with our now greater understanding of epidemiology and the benefit of hindsight, there are some vital lessons to be learnt from this story that we can apply to our current situation to help us kick the crap out of COVID. Firstly, the masks that were most commonly worn during the Spanish flu were made of gauze. Advanced respirators and even basic surgical masks, typically 3 layers of polypropylene sandwiched between non-woven fabric, were a distant invention of the future. Gauze, on the other hand, is, well, a thin fabric mesh full of holes so large they are easily visible to the naked eye. That instantly puts a huge droplet-shaped hole in what conclusions we can draw from this data. To make matters worse, basic education for the general public on how to wear a mask, including not touching it and keeping it dry, was practically non-existent, at least outside of medical environments. And, as we'll soon discover, how you wear a mask is far more important than whether or not you wear one, because incorrect usage can actually increase your likelihood of catching and spreading a virus. Michael Mina is Assistant Professor of Epidemiology at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and a core member of the Center for Communicable Disease Dynamics. He is joining us from the forum at Harvard Chan. I asked Michael why he thinks masks weren't all that effective during the Spanish flu.
I would say it's pretty hard to compare 1918 with today, both from the quality of the masks, but also I haven't seen particularly compelling evidence anyway of just how reliably people were actually wearing them.
So, fast forward to our current situation. As far as we know, this coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, which causes the disease called Covid-19, spreads primarily through respiratory droplets, which can be projected as far as 8 meters through coughing and sneezing. But surely, if I touch a droplet from an infected individual that's landed on a surface and then touch my face, the chance of me catching COVID is still fairly low, right? This is called fomite transmission, and provided the droplet which is now on your hand makes contact with a mucous membrane, such as your eyes, the inside of your nose and mouth, you just put yourself at considerable risk. Because it's estimated that each droplet contains thousands of coronavirus particles, known as virions when outside the body. And theoretically, all it takes is one virion to enter your system, evade your biological defenses, and bind with one of your respiratory cell's receptors to cause infection. Although in the real world, it will usually take a lot more than just one virus particle to cause infection. You may be thinking that you rarely, if ever, touch your face. But you probably do so much more than you realize, because it's an action that's often autonomic, meaning you're not consciously aware you're doing it. A 2015 study in the American Journal of Infection Control found that participants touched their face an average of 23 times per hour, and 44% of those touches were on mucous membranes. But subconsciously prodding your mucous membranes may not even be required in the first place. One study demonstrated how smaller viral particles, called aerosols, can remain suspended in the air for around 14 minutes in laboratory conditions, though this time would vary wildly in the real world depending on atmospheric conditions.
Certainly, we have pretty good evidence at this point that aerosolized virus is a mode of transmission, and certainly within minutes, I don't see anything that would imply that it couldn't exist. And I actually would suggest that given the right type of super spreader who's maybe really aerosolizing a lot due to some physiological differences that maybe they have, or just how high the viral titer is in the respiratory tract, I wouldn't be surprised if it's even quite a bit longer than that, half hour. You know, the virus we know does exist on surfaces, and it can similarly exist suspended in the air.
And simply breathing in infected aerosols may be enough to cause infection. And it's not just those who are obviously ill with COVID-19, coughing and sneezing all over the place, who are spreading it. As you may have heard, people who test positive for COVID can be asymptomatic. We're still unsure about what percentage of those with the disease are asymptomatic, but studies have estimated anywhere from 18 to 80%. Quite the range, I know. I asked Michael Mina what his take is on this.
My guess is probably at least 50% of people are, for all intents and purposes, asymptomatic. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in terms of the number of people who recognize that they have been infected by the time that they're actually transmitting, without kind of looking back and saying, oh yeah, I might have been sick at that point. Maybe it is up around 70 or 80% who just don't actually recognize that they're sick at the time that they're able to transmit the virus.
But the important takeaway is that individuals who are asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic, meaning they are yet to show symptoms, can still spread this particular coronavirus. You may be wondering how that's even possible if they aren't coughing and sneezing aerosols and droplets everywhere. It's a good question, but it turns out COVID-19 has unique properties that make this type of transmission a lot more likely. It produces an unusually high number of viral particles in the upper viral tract. That's the mouth, nasal cavity, pharynx, and larynx. And these can very easily shed outside of the body simply by talking. Compared to seasonal flu, researchers found that COVID-19 is expelled from the body through talking at a much higher rate in pre- and asymptomatic patients. And every time you talk, even quietly, you're spraying thousands of tiny droplets into the environment around you. After all, the act of talking is essentially just expelling air through a very damp chamber full of saliva, mucus, and tiny bits of your breakfast. And if you talk loudly or shout, you can propel these droplets just as far as a cough or sneeze, potentially infecting many others around you in a public space. But don't think you can just avoid talking to people, because as Michael Mina explains, there are a couple of other ways that asymptomatic people can spread COVID-19.
It's not just from talking, it could also be from coughing. A lot of times people with COVID have a dry cough, so you could have a cough there, but in general, it's going to be one of those. But it can even just be breathing, but talking does create more of an expulsion of sort of a high energy wave out of you.
So, it's fairly self-evident that wearing a good face mask can reduce the expulsion of these tiny aerosolized virions and larger droplets. And indeed, using nifty camera tricks, a few studies have been able to demonstrate just how great face masks are at almost entirely eliminating droplet expulsion and the formation of aerosols, as shown here by this brilliant footage captured by the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And since we don't yet know what percentage of people are asymptomatic, and the very nature of being pre or asymptomatic means that neither you nor anyone around you can identify if you actually have COVID-19, wearing a face mask seems like a really sensible precaution. By simply wearing a mask in public, you vastly reduce the likelihood that you'll infect those around you if you happen to have COVID but not realize it. Don't believe me? One man traveling from China to Toronto had a dry cough the entire flight and tested positive for COVID-19 after he landed. Thankfully, he had been wearing a face mask during the journey. The result? All 25 people sitting closest to him on the flight tested negative for COVID-19 afterwards. There are many other such examples, to name just one. 2 hairstylists in Missouri who were ill with COVID-19 but wore face masks interacted with and cut the hair of 139 clients whilst they were ill. But when all of those clients were tested afterwards, not one of them tested positive for COVID-19. A very recent study from Oxford University, published in late June, concluded that, yes, when made of optimal materials, which we'll get into in just a moment, face masks are highly effective at reducing the spread of COVID-19. However, this effectiveness relies on proper education on and widespread adherence to correct mask usage, good hand hygiene and social distancing. And this sort of consistent messaging is not something we've seen up to now, which the study highlights as a contributing factor as to why we've yet to see any irrefutable correlation between widespread mask adoption and lower transmission rates or numbers. But people are beginning to pay attention. The percentage of Americans now wearing masks in public was up to 67% in July, and around 84% of Italians are wearing them, despite neither of these two countries having an established culture of wearing face coverings. No doubt, a lot more data will emerge over the coming months. Okay, so we're fairly darn sure that wearing a face mask can stop you from spreading COVID-19. That's great. But what you might want to really know is whether wearing a mask reduces the likelihood of you catching it. If some reprobate coughs in my face when I'm wearing the correct type of mask, will I get away virus-free? The truth is, we still don't know that yet. What we can quite confidently say is there is no face covering that will guarantee you won't catch any virus, even if you're ready to go full diving helmet. The only truly scientific way to test whether masks protect the wearer as well as those around them would be to gather up a bunch of COVID-positive people and ask them to talk and cough directly at 2 groups of people in 2 separate rooms. One group who are wearing face masks and another who are not. For obvious reasons, that's not ethically possible. And this gap in our knowledge is probably a large part of the reason you're seeing a lot of mixed advice on the efficacy of face masks as a means of protection. All scientists can really do is look at real-world examples and attempt to extrapolate correlations. something they haven't been able to do conclusively just yet. But to state the obvious, having material in front of one's nose and mouth creates a physical barrier between your mucous membranes and the outside world that will very likely filter out at least some of those nasty virus particles. There's a long and storied history of this in medical environments, and there's strong scientific data supporting this, which is why PPE is so strictly mandated in hospitals and nursing homes. This isn't just to reduce onward transmission, it's to protect the well-being of those vital health workers caring for people who are ill with COVID. But compared to a full PPE kit, which includes a gown, N95 respirator, goggles, face shield and rubber boots, your mileage is going to vary significantly. Even if you wear a decent face mask, your eyes are still an unguarded mucous membrane on which tiny aerosolized virus particles can settle and infect you. But don't sweat, Professor Michael Mina thinks that this transmission vector through the eyes is not something we should all be getting worked up over in real-world environments.
I don't know how much I subscribe to the eyes being a major form of transmission or acquisition. I think that it's probably unlikely. If you're immune compromised or you have cancer or something like that, then sure, wear goggles to give you excess protection. But my feeling is it's not going to be a main mode of transmit or of acquisition.
Put simply, a face mask offers the wearer a higher degree of protection than not wearing one, even if we aren't entirely sure what that degree is yet. But as we've learned from the Spanish flu, material matters. If your face mask is made of Swiss cheese or is otherwise porous, it's going to do very little in the way of protecting you and preventing you from passing on virus particles to others. What may surprise you, however, is that you don't need medical-grade face masks to help protect others and yourself. Any tightly woven cotton t-shirt, crudely cut out and fashioned into a mask, preferably folded to create a double layer, will significantly reduce your capacity for transmission in both directions. Don't want to chop up your precious Iron Maiden 1981 tour t-shirt? Fear not. A recent study conducted at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in the US suggested that some easily attainable materials such as heavyweight quilter's cotton and even vacuum cleaner bags, preferably unused, provide fantastic protection, filtering out as many as 79% of particles, 0.3 to 1 microns in diameter, the typical size range of aerosolized virions. That's actually more than surgical masks, which the same study found to stop 62 to 65% of virus particles. That's because surgical masks can be more porous than your typical dense cotton fabric and don't protect quite so well against the smallest of aerosolized particles, as they are primarily designed to stop large droplets. They're still a fantastic choice though, which you definitely shouldn't pass over. Because keep in mind this study focused on filtering the tiniest of virions. As we saw in the footage earlier, surgical masks are more effective at filtering large droplets than cloth masks are, and so can offer more well-rounded protection. Lightweight bandanas and scarves were amongst the materials that provided the least filtration power and would not be widely recommended as a suitable face covering. In fact, a recent study by Duke University researcher Martin Fisher found that using a neck fleece actually increased transmission by an additional 10% compared to wearing nothing at all. A bandana was found to make little to no difference to filtration. The mask that offered the most protection was of the N95 variety, which is not at all surprising. Its name literally comes from the fact that it filters out 95% of particles. In this particular study, however, it filtered 97%. But before you rush out and buy an N95 respirator, consider that they are currently in extremely high demand, primarily by those on the front line treating COVID patients. They aren't easy to get hold of, even if you did manage to find a couple listed in some highly questionable, rarely visited corner of the internet. Yeah, a small tip here, if your face mask provider also sells discounts dog food, give it a miss. Even if they were easy to source. What have I told you? that you're still better off covering your face with something like a t-shirt, surgical mask, or any other densely woven material instead. You see, some variants of N95 respirators, especially those used in the construction industry, but some that are used by medical professionals too, have an outlet valve on the front that's designed to allow unfiltered air to escape, meaning that they offer little to no protection to those around the wearer. Many health professionals are strongly advising against the use of this kind of mask because they are ineffective in reducing the spread of COVID-19. The same goes for any other masks you can purchase that feature an outlet valve, like those cotton ones you've probably seen popping up everywhere recently. Far from protecting those around them, wearers of these kinds of masks are essentially exhaling highly targeted streams of unfiltered air, potentially containing millions of coronavirus particles at anyone who happens to be nearby. That's why Disney has wisely outright banned the use of masks that contain a valve in Disney World theme parks. They've also specified that all masks worn must contain at least 2 layers of material. Even more important than the kind of mask you wear is how you wear it. A lot of governments right now are mandating the wearing of face masks in indoor public spaces. But if most people are unsure of how to wear masks properly or simply refuse to follow the correct procedures, then they may as well be walking around licking lampposts. And if that's how you roll anyway, then I strongly advise you to put your weird hobby to bed until we're no longer in a global pandemic. Thanks. Like I said earlier, wearing a mask incorrectly can put you and others around you at higher risk of catching this coronavirus than not wearing one at all. And I know it can be frustrating when you see people wearing masks incorrectly, and for example, grabbing the front of their mask and rearranging it every 2 minutes. But here's a quick fire checklist of some really solid mask hygiene practices you can follow, so at least you can set a good example. Wash your hands before putting on and removing your mask. Only put on your mask by touching the ear straps and pulling it over the ears so it's snug and secure. If the mask has a metal strip at the top, pinch it to create a better seal around the nose. Never touch the material part of the mask after you've put it on, especially when in public, because it could be saturated with coronavirus particles that will then be on your fingers and could lead to fomite transmission to yourself or others. If it helps you remember, pretend that the material part of your mask is made out of lava, and if you touch it, your hand will turn into a lump of charcoal. If you do need to remove your mask in public, remove it via the ear straps only and place it on a surface with the outside or front side of the mask facing down, touching the surface. Make sure no surfaces come into contact with the inside of your mask. If your mask gets damp or wet, which can happen after a few hours of use because of your breath, you need to replace it with a fresh mask, or go home and either discard it or wash it, because a damp mask offers significantly lower protection. Only remove your masks via the ear straps. After you take your mask off, either put it in the washing machine or dispose of it, and then wash your hands for at least 20 seconds with soap and water. And, of course, there's the issue that when people wear a mask, they may feel as though they instantly become a quasi-COVID Terminator and are hence magically invulnerable to the virus and get excessively cocky, engaging in behaviours that actually put others at more risk, like ignoring social distancing or attending large gatherings. You know when you're casually comparing mangoes in the supermarket and out of nowhere some guy shoves his big mask-covered beak about 2 millimeters from your face to reach over and grab something? Well, don't be that guy. Just remember, wearing a mask is only one piece of a larger puzzle in the fight to stem the spread of this virus. It doesn't make social distancing or good hand hygiene any less important. All of these elements are needed if we're going to slow this thing down until there's an effective vaccine or perhaps a fast and reliable quantitative home testing kit.
Short of a vaccine, giving everyone a test that they can use every single day that can tell them if they're transmitting the virus will essentially create a semblance of herd immunity. And it could actually, our calculations suggest that it could very rapidly cause the virus to be depleted out of a population. If we had everyone or being able to use, or most people being able to use a test for transmissibility every morning or every other morning.
That's all very well, 42, but I've heard that wearing a face mask can reduce oxygen intake, whilst increasing carbon dioxide intake from your own exhalations, and can thus cause hypoxia or hypercapnia, so that if you aren't careful, you'll keel over and die like a strangled salmon. Well, if I may be blunt for a second, this is absolute rubbish, and no more than internet gossip and fear-mongering. Unless we're talking about young children or those with pre-existing breathing complications, there is no chance that wearing a simple cotton or surgical mask will cut off a sufficient quantity of your oxygen intake to cause any ill effects, even if you do wear it all day long. Not even N95 respirators are known to cause hypoxia or hypercapnia in healthy adults. Surgeons all over the world have been wearing them, not to mention other extremely tight and restrictive face coverings, for decades now, sometimes all day long, and we don't see mass die-offs of surgeons on the headlines. It may feel like your breathing is obstructed when you put on a mask, but that's most likely because mask wearing is new to you and you're not used to the sensation. Because, yes, obviously, your breathing is restricted a little with a mask, but there's simply no reputable evidence that this is dangerous in fit and healthy individuals. Of course, please do remove your mask if you start to feel lightheaded for any reason. So, to summarise, as far as we know, the main benefit of wearing a face mask is not to protect yourself. It's to prevent you from passing coronavirus particles to others, who may be more vulnerable than you, or who may pass it on to others who are. And I think in times like this, it's nice to go out of your way a little to be caring and compassionate to those in society who may not be as fit and healthy as you and I. And because it's close to a certainty that COVID-19 spreads pre- and asymptomatically, simply wearing a mask is a good way to do your bit to reduce onwards transmission and help put this frustrating chapter of humanity behind us so we can all stop wearing our pajamas 24/7. Because let's be honest, they probably needed a damn good wash after week 1 of lockdown. And by now, they might be harbouring the first stirrings of the next global pandemic. I'm just trying to help shed some light on an area that I think has been confusing for a lot of people, thanks to the endless onslaught of conflicting guidance from every angle. I know a lot of people have strong opinions on wearing masks, many of which are understandable. So, unless you're in a place where your government has mandated the wearing of one, which is soon to be most places anyway, whether you do wear a face mask is ultimately your call to make. But from my point of view, mask adoption is almost certain to save some lives, and any downsides are, at least for the vast majority of people, negligible. Either way, good luck out there, and thank you for watching. Thank you to the team at Google and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, who helped make this video possible, and especially Dr. Michael Mina, Ph.D, for his invaluable time and expertise.